On a rainy São Paulo night, a German shepherd puppy named Rex huddled beneath a rusted dumpster, his small body racked with uncontrollable tremors. His matted fur was caked with mud and blood. His ribs showed painfully beneath his thin coat, his spirit crushed by the brutal training he'd received at Estrela Kennel, where he was beaten mercilessly for failing to grasp commands far beyond his young understanding. Every sound made Rex flinch. Every shadow made him cower. His ears were pinned flat against his skull in a state of perpetual fear. He couldn't even lift his head without trembling, convinced that any movement might bring another blow, another harsh word calling him dumb and useless, labels that had become his identity in his short, painful existence. The roar of cars on Avenida Paulista only intensified his dread. Each horn blast made him shrink further against the cold brick wall. The typical summer rain soaked his battered coat, the chill seeping into his weak bones. It had been 3 days since he'd eaten anything other than scraps foraged from the trash. His stomach ached with a hollow gnawing as he tried to make himself invisible to a world that had only shown him cruelty. When a group of teenagers walked by, their loud chatter echoing in the alley, Rex sank deeper into the shadows, his amber eyes reflecting pure terror. One of them tossed an empty can that clanged against the dumpster with a metallic crash, causing the puppy to urinate in fear where he lay, shame mixing with his terror. Among the towering buildings of the Brazilian metropolis, no one seemed to notice the broken puppy whose trust had been shattered by the hands that should have protected him. Estrela Kennel, from which he'd escaped a week ago, was known in the breeder's underworld for its brutal methods and squalid conditions. There, dogs were treated as commodities, not living beings. Rex had been bought to become a guard dog, but his naturally gentle temperament was seen as a flaw to be beaten out of him. Through the storm, Carlos, a decorated firefighter and former military K-9 trainer in the Brazilian army, was walking home from his shift at the São Paulo Fire Department. Something inexplicable drew him toward the alley where Rex was hiding, as if an invisible thread of fate was connecting them through the darkness and the rain, guiding his steps toward a life that desperately needed to be saved. When Carlos spotted those terrified eyes glowing from beneath the dumpster, his heart broke at the sight of such profound fear. With infinite patience, he crouched down, extended his hand, and spoke in soft, warm tones that somehow pierced the wall of terror surrounding the puppy's heart, creating the first fragile bridge of trust between them. "Hey, little one. It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you," Carlos whispered, rainwater streaming down his face as he remained perfectly still, respecting the traumatized animal's space. His soaked uniform felt heavy on his tired shoulders after 12 hours fighting a blaze in the city center. But something in those amber eyes stopped him from simply continuing on his way to his apartment in Vila Mariana. Carlos stayed there, crouched, for nearly 30 minutes, the São Paulo traffic a distant hum as the night deepened. With an almost imperceptible movement, he pulled a piece of cheese bread from his pocket, his uneaten snack from his break, and gently placed it on the wet ground between them. "You must be hungry, buddy," he murmured, remembering the techniques he'd learned during his service with the military dogs in Manaus. The puppy watched with suspicion, his small body still trembling violently. His survival instincts warred with a devastating hunger. Carlos remained motionless, only his gentle voice moving through the space between them like a warm current. "I know someone hurt you badly, but I promise, I will never raise a hand to you." After what felt like an eternity, Rex stretched his thin neck forward a few inches. The scent of the food was momentarily overpowering his terror. Carlos smiled softly, feeling as though he had just witnessed something precious. The first, tiny step toward trust. After an eternity of gentle encouragement, Rex summoned every ounce of courage left in his broken spirit to inch forward, his movements stiff and pained. When his cold nose finally touched Carlos's outstretched hand, something inside the puppy shattered, not with more damage but with release as his weak whimpers turned into heart-wrenching sobs. His frail body collapsed against the man's arm in complete surrender. Carlos gently wrapped his jacket around the cold, trembling puppy, holding him close as Rex buried his head under the man's chin, still too ashamed to be seen. "You have nothing to be ashamed of," Carlos whispered against the damp fur, his own voice thick with emotion. "You're not dumb. You're brave, and I'm going to prove it to you." The words planted the first tiny seed of hope in soil that had only known cruelty. The rain began to soften over São Paulo, the city lights reflecting in the puddles, as Carlos remained there, feeling the puppy's racing heart against his own. Rex's tremors didn't stop immediately. Years of abuse couldn't be undone in minutes, but there was a subtle shift in his posture, a surrender that came not from fear, but from exhausted relief. "Let's go home, buddy," Carlos murmured, rising carefully so as not to startle the small creature who now depended entirely on him. The firefighter noticed the open sores on the puppy's paws, the bite marks on his ears, and the way one of his back legs didn't seem to move correctly. His rage at whoever had done this mingled with a steely determination to heal not just this animal's body, but his soul. As he walked through the streets of São Paulo toward his apartment, Carlos felt the puppy snuggle deeper into his chest as they passed hurried pedestrians and rumbling buses. People glanced curiously at the firefighter carrying what looked like a wet, shivering bundle, but Carlos barely noticed, completely absorbed in the responsibility he had just undertaken. "I don't know what you've been through," he whispered while waiting at a traffic light on Avenida Paulista, "but I promise no one will ever hurt you again." With those words, he felt the puppy relax just a little more, as if he somehow understood the promise being made. For a dog who had never known kindness, every soft word and gentle touch was like a drop of water in a desert of fear. Sunlight streamed through the windows of Carlos's modest apartment, bathing the living room in a warm, golden glow. But Rex remained curled in a blanket near the heater, still trembling despite the comfort around him. His eyes stayed fixed on the floor, his body language screaming with shame and fear, as if he expected his newfound safety to be snatched away at any moment. Carlos placed a shallow bowl of warm chicken broth near the puppy's nose, speaking in gentle tones that asked for nothing, but offered everything. He understood that rescue wasn't a single moment, but a process. That the hardest wounds to heal are the ones invisible to the eye. The ones that had convinced Rex he deserved nothing but pain and rejection in this world. Even after the careful bath the night before, where Carlos had removed ticks and cleaned wounds with the delicacy of someone handling broken porcelain, the puppy still cringed at the slightest movement. The local rescue center vet Carlos had called confirmed his suspicions. Severe malnutrition, parasites, 2 cracked ribs, and clear signs of repeated beatings. "It's going to take time," Carlos murmured, sitting on the floor a few feet away so as not to intimidate the animal. His third-floor apartment, normally a quiet refuge from his intense shifts, now felt like a makeshift sanctuary. The night before, he had fashioned a bed from old blankets and a cut-down cardboard box, placing it in the quietest corner of the room. Carlos's phone buzzed. A message from his colleague, Mariana, asking why he hadn't shown up for the team barbecue. He quickly replied, explaining about the rescued puppy, and she immediately offered to bring by some basic dog supplies. "That's the Carlos we know, always saving someone," she texted back with a smiling emoji. Turning his attention back to the puppy, Carlos noticed that Rex had finally stretched his neck just far enough to lap at the broth, though his eyes never stopped monitoring the man's movements. "That's it, champ. One step at a time," Carlos encouraged, keeping his voice calm and steady. He knew from his experience with traumatized military dogs that consistency was everything. Every kind word, every predictable movement, every moment of respect for the animal's space was another stone in the bridge being built across the chasm of mistrust. Later that afternoon, Carlos placed a soft leather collar and a small fire hydrant-shaped chew toy beside Rex, then sat back and waited with endless patience. As the sun began to set, the puppy finally lifted his head slightly, his nose twitching at the unfamiliar scent of the toy, before he cautiously stretched out a paw to touch the colored rubber. His eyes darted nervously to Carlos, seeking reassurance that this wasn't a trap, that reaching for something he wanted wouldn't result in punishment. When Carlos simply smiled without moving, Rex slowly dragged the toy closer, not playing with it, but holding it between his paws like a talisman, a physical representation of the possibility that life might not always hurt. The apartment was bathed in the orange glow of the setting sun, the shadows growing long as Carlos remained motionless, honoring the animal's timeline. Through the open window, the distant sounds of the city drifted in: music, conversation, the steady rhythm of a metropolis that never slept. The city continued its ceaseless motion, while inside these four walls, a small miracle was unfolding in slow motion. Mariana had stopped by earlier, bringing not just premium puppy food, but also a booklet on canine behavior and trauma. "My cousin is a veterinary behaviorist," she had explained. "She said you need to establish predictable routines. Predictability is the opposite of trauma." Now, watching the puppy timidly examine the toy, Carlos understood the wisdom in that advice. Ever since being discharged from the Army's K-9 unit after an accident that left scars on his own body, Carlos had felt a void that his work as a firefighter couldn't completely fill. There was something special about the connection with dogs, an honesty he rarely found among humans. "See? It's yours," Carlos said softly, as Rex finally gave the toy a tentative chew. The sound of the squeaking rubber seemed to startle him for a moment, but he soon tried again, a little more confidently this time. It was microscopic progress by any other dog's standards, but for Rex it was a mountain climbed. In the next building someone blasted music, and the puppy flinched instinctively. But instead of hiding completely, as he would have hours before, he only crouched lower, still clutching his new treasure. Carlos smiled. "That's it, brave boy. One step at a time." The next day, Carlos decided it was time to introduce Rex to the world beyond the living room, gently clipping a leash to the puppy's new collar. The moment the leash clicked shut, Rex threw himself to the ground, his body flattened against the wood floor as if bracing for a blow, his past experiences causing him to associate the leash with pain instead of exploration. After nearly an hour of gentle reassurances and patient strokes, the tension in Rex's body slowly melted away, allowing Carlos to lead him outside to the small condominium square. The moment the puppy's paws touched the grass, something shifted in his demeanor. His snout lifted to take in the fresh scents of earth and freedom. His ears perked up slightly, and for the very first time, his tail gave a weak, uncertain wag that spoke volumes about the healing beginning to take root in his wounded soul. Carlos took a deep breath of the morning air, pleased with this small victory. Around them, the world continued its normal rhythm. An elderly woman walked her well-groomed poodle. A few residents hurried off to work, and children waited on the sidewalk for the school bus. The woman's poodle trotted over curiously, but Carlos gently kept his distance, knowing Rex wasn't ready for canine interactions. "Sorry, Mrs. Lords. He's still recovering," he explained. The old woman smiled with understanding. "Another rescue for the building's hero firefighter?" Rex watched the other dog with a mixture of fear and curiosity, his body still tense but no longer paralyzed. Carlos crouched beside him, keeping the leash slack. "It's okay, partner. In your own time," he murmured, offering a treat he'd brought in his pocket. The puppy hesitated, his gaze shifting between the food and the unfamiliar surroundings, as if weighing the risk of every move. A boy of about 12 stopped a few feet away, watching with interest. "Can I pet him, sir?" he asked eagerly. Carlos shook his head. "Not yet, Pedro. He's been through some hard things, and he's learning to trust again." The boy nodded with surprising maturity. "Like that dog the teacher showed us in the documentary? The one that was mistreated?" Carlos confirmed, impressed by the boy's perception. Rex finally gathered the courage to step onto the soft grass, his snout twitching eagerly as it absorbed the rush of new scents. A leaf stirred by the breeze made him jump back in alarm, but he quickly steadied himself, his fear fading a little more than before. For Carlos, every flicker of curiosity was a hard-won victory. He stood quietly, simply watching as Rex discovered, perhaps for the first time, that the world held wonders beyond threats. In that small garden, surrounded by fresh sensations and possibilities, Rex took hesitant steps forward, his confidence growing with each paw print in the yielding earth. In a moment Carlos would cherish forever. The puppy lifted his head to the sky, his eyes wide with wonder, and let out a small, uncertain bark, the first sound of hope from his once silent world. That night, as Carlos tried to leave Rex in the living room, the puppy whimpered softly, his body trembling with the old fear of abandonment. Without a second thought, Carlos scooped him up and carried him to his own room, gently placing him at the foot of the bed. There, the steady rhythm of Carlos's breathing guided Rex into his first peaceful sleep since the rescue. Lying there, watching the puppy finally relax, Carlos felt something stir within him, a warmth he hadn't known since his days with the canine unit. After the accident that scarred his left leg and ended his military dog work, he had resigned himself to a life without that deep connection. The modest two-bedroom apartment was simply furnished, with family photos and books on first aid and dog training lining the shelves. Through the half-open window, the night breeze from the Paraíso neighborhood carried distant sounds from Avenida Paulista. When his phone buzzed with the morning alarm, Carlos silenced it quickly, not wanting to startle Rex. His commander would understand if he requested another day off. The São Paulo Fire Department always valued compassion in its members. Surprisingly, Rex didn't stir at the noise, his deep sleep a silent testament to how desperately he needed rest without fear. Carlos imagined the countless nights the dog had spent on edge, waiting for the next blow or shout, unable to let his guard down. In the darkness, Carlos whispered, "You're safe now, partner." As if understanding, Rex breathed more deeply in his sleep, his paws occasionally twitching in dreams where, Carlos hoped, he could run free from fear. As the golden light of dawn filtered through the thin curtains, Carlos awoke to a warm, heavy weight on his chest. During the night, Rex had moved closer, seeking the safety of the human heart that had saved him. The week that followed brought small triumphs. Rex grew more trusting, venturing outside to sniff the grass and even allowing Carlos to brush his rough fur. Yet deep down, the scars of his past still held sway, surfacing in sudden terror at ordinary sounds or movements that triggered memories of abuse. On their first attempt to walk beyond the condo garden, a loud construction boom nearby froze Rex in paralyzing fear. His legs buckled as he collapsed, covering his head with his paws as if bracing for a blow. Carlos's heart shattered at the sight. He gathered the trembling puppy in his arms, rocking him gently, while whispering promises of safety he vowed to keep, no matter the cost. They were just 3 blocks from the apartment on Alameda Campinas, when the pneumatic hammer started its deafening roar. In seconds, days of progress unraveled before Carlos's eyes. "It's okay, it's okay," he murmured against Rex's flattened ears, feeling the dog's rapid heartbeat against his own. Curious passers-by glanced at the firefighter crouched on the sidewalk, some averting their eyes with pity. A kind woman paused to offer help. "Is he hurt?" she asked. "Not physically," Carlos replied, grateful for her concern. "He's a recent rescue, still learning that the world can be safe." She nodded understandingly. "My niece adopted one like him from the Santo Amaro shelter. It took nearly a year for him to stop hiding during storms." Carlos sighed, comforted knowing he wasn't alone in this journey. When Rex finally stopped shaking, they abandoned their plans for the park and headed home. What should have been an adventure became a harsh reminder of the work ahead. Back at the apartment, Rex hid under the kitchen table, refusing even his favorite treat. Carlos respected his space, leaving the bowl nearby, and settled on the sofa with a book on post-traumatic canine behavior, occasionally glancing at the puppy. "Don't worry, partner," he said softly. "We'll try again tomorrow. And the next day, I'm not giving up on you." That night, for the first time since his rescue, Rex chose to sleep under the bed, seeking the comfort of a confined space where nothing could reach him. Carlos lay on the floor beside the bed for nearly an hour, speaking gently until exhaustion claimed the puppy. Rex refused to let Carlos leave the room, whining with wide, terrified eyes whenever his savior tried to step away. The construction noise had reopened wounds that were only beginning to heal, plunging him back into the darkness of his traumatic past, where every shadow hid potential pain. Carlos gave up on sleeping separately, grabbing a pillow and lying down next to Rex's blanket. In the dim light, the puppy inched closer until his small head rested against Carlos's chest, his body finally stilling as the steady heartbeat anchored him amid his fears, a rhythm promising safety in a world that had shown him so little. At 3:20 a.m., as shown on the digital clock, Carlos noticed Rex having nightmares. The puppy's paws thrashed wildly, soft whines escaping his throat, his whole body shuddering against the cool floor. "Shh, it's all right," Carlos murmured, careful not to touch him and risk more fright. Instead, he hummed a lullaby his mother had sung to him as a child in Minas Gerais. The soothing melody gradually calmed Rex, who relaxed once more. Through the window, Carlos gazed at the endless lights of São Paulo, a city that never truly slept, with distant sirens and horns reminding him of its unrelenting pace. Yet, in this apartment, 2 hearts found solace in each other's company. Carlos thought of his supervisor, who had questioned why he was investing so much time in just one stray when so many people needed help. "Because every life matters," had been his simple response. What he didn't say was how rescuing Rex was rescuing a part of himself, lost amid years of witnessing too much tragedy on the city's streets. As the sky began to lighten with the first rays of dawn, Carlos finally drifted off, his arm protectively curved around the puppy. That's how Mariana found them when she used the spare key to enter, worried because Carlos hadn't replied to her messages about the team meeting. She smiled at the scene, snapped a discreet photo, and left a package on the kitchen table with premium dog food and a book titled Rebuilding Trust: The Recovery Journey for Traumatized Dogs, before slipping out quietly. The next morning, as Carlos gently scratched behind Rex's ear, he made a crucial decision. "This won't be your life anymore, partner," he said with quiet determination. "You're not broken. You're just waiting to become who you were meant to be." Those words marked a turning point, a realization that healing Rex's deep trauma required more than love and patience alone. Carlos reached out to Juliana, a trusted friend from his army days, and a former K9 trainer specializing in rehabilitating traumatized service dogs. If anyone could help, it was her. As they set off in the truck toward the Tibaya Rehabilitation Center, Rex peeked out from under his blanket, with eyes still full of uncertainty, but also a spark of something new, curiosity about what lay ahead. The drive along the Fernão Dias highway was calm, with Carlos keeping a moderate speed to avoid stressing the puppy. He glanced in the rearview mirror now and then at Rex curled on the back seat in his favorite blanket, an old fire department hoodie turned into a makeshift bed. "You'll like Juliana," Carlos said, more to himself than to the dog. "She understands what you've been through. After coming back from Afghanistan, she dedicated her life to helping dogs like you." The urban sprawl of São Paulo gradually gave way to the lush green mountains of the Serra da Cantareira. At the toll booth, the noise startled Rex, sending him hiding fully under the blanket. Carlos sighed. Each reaction was a reminder of the long road ahead. The Canine Rehabilitation Center was set on a spacious estate, with open enclosures and low buildings that felt more like cozy homes than training facilities. When Carlos parked, Juliana was already waiting at the entrance, her gray hair in a simple bun, wearing cargo pants and a Center logo t-shirt. "Long time, Firefighter," she smiled, hugging him briefly before peering into the back seat. "So, this is the famous Rex?" Carlos nodded. "He had a setback yesterday. A construction noise took him right back." He didn't need to elaborate. Juliana understood. "Trauma isn't a straight line, Carlos. It's more like a spiral. Sometimes it feels like you're back at the start, but you're actually at a different point on the curve." She approached the truck slowly, avoiding direct eye contact with Rex. Instead, she crouched a few meters away and waited. To Carlos's surprise, after a few minutes, Rex stretched his neck out from under the blanket, sniffing the air toward her. "See?" Juliana smiled. "He's already making his own choices. That's the first step." As they unloaded Rex's things, his blanket, a few toys, and food, Carlos felt a lump in his throat. "How long do you think?" "As long as it takes," Juliana replied firmly. "But you can visit every day. It's essential you're part of the process." The center was on the outskirts of Atibaia, a serene property surrounded by open fields and rolling hills, designed to heal broken spirits. Despite the peaceful setting, Rex pressed against the truck floor upon arrival, his ears flat and body shaking, as past associations with training facilities triggered his deepest fears. Juliana waited outside, her calm, commanding presence instinctively trusted by animals. Her silver hair was tucked under a worn baseball cap, her experienced eyes softening at the sight of Rex. "The poor thing's been through a war, hasn't he?" she said quietly, as Carlos carried the trembling puppy in his arms. "Worse, but he's a fighter," Carlos replied solemnly, words that acknowledged both the depth of Rex's trauma and the resilience flickering within him. Juliana nodded, fully grasping the meaning. She had worked with dogs from the Special Police Operations Battalion, traumatized after violent encounters in Rio's favelas. "We'll start slow," she explained, leading them not to the main building, but to a small wooden cabin near a grove of araucaria trees. "This is the welcome cottage. All our newcomers start here." Inside, the cabin was surprisingly cozy, with soft rugs on the wooden floor, soundproof walls to block startling noises, and various dog beds scattered around. A diffuser released a gentle lavender scent into the air. "Lavender helps reduce anxiety," Juliana explained, noticing Carlos's curious look. "I learned that working with search dogs after the Brumadinho disaster. They were less stressed and tense with these." Juliana didn't try to touch Rex right away. Instead, she sat on the floor and waited. Carlos placed Rex gently on one of the rugs and joined her. For nearly 20 minutes, no one spoke. The only sounds were the soft tick of a clock and Rex's occasional deep sigh. Most people didn't realize that patience was the first skill needed for cases like this. Finally, Juliana broke the silence. "We're operating on his time, not ours." Carlos watched as Rex, though still clearly frightened, began to move his eyes around, cautiously assessing the space. It was a tiny step, but a monumental one. He was no longer paralyzed by fear. "I've been a firefighter for 15 years, Carlos remarked, his voice heavy. "I've seen people on their worst days, people who've lost everything. But I still can't wrap my head around how someone could deliberately hurt an animal like this." Juliana sighed, her gaze soft. "Don't try to understand cruelty, Carlos. Focus on the healing. It's what's kept me sane all these years." She offered a treat to Rex, placing it on the floor between them. "Our little warrior here, he's going to teach us a lot about resilience. You'll see." The puppy looked at the treat, then at the two humans. His body was still a taut wire of tension, but his eyes held a careful calculation that broke Carlos's heart. Even starved for food, he was weighing the risk of accepting it in the presence of strangers. The first days at the center progressed with a deliberate, gentle slowness. Juliana would spend hours just sitting near Rex, allowing him to grow accustomed to her presence without pressure or expectation. When the puppy trembled uncontrollably or flinched at a sudden noise, she would soothe him with a steady voice and unshakable patience, never forcing contact, never rushing his journey back to trust. On the third day, Rex took his first voluntary steps toward Juliana. His tail gave a barely perceptible wag, a gesture that spoke volumes about the courage building inside his small body. Carlos watched these small victories with a swelling in his chest, his eyes sometimes blurring, as he saw the terrified puppy begin to seek connection instead of cowering from pain. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Carlos had taken the day off from the fire station to spend it at the center, sitting quietly in a corner of the recovery room, observing Juliana and Rex. The animal behaviorist was on the floor, pretending to read a book, but Carlos could see how she monitored Rex's every move from the corner of her eye. The puppy was lying on a rug about 6 feet away from her. He looked relaxed, but Carlos recognized the subtle signs of constant alert. The ears that twitched at the slightest sound. The eyes that never fully closed. When Carlos's phone vibrated in his pocket, he silenced it quickly, but not quickly enough. Rex shot to his feet, scanning every direction, searching for the threat. Sorry, Carlos whispered to Juliana. She simply shook her head, signaling it was fine. She remained exactly as she was, not overreacting to Rex's fright, not trying to calm him. Instead, she simply existed in the space, a constant, non-threatening presence. Slowly, incredibly, Rex settled himself. And then, in a move that made Carlos hold his breath, the puppy took 3 hesitant steps toward Juliana, his tail moving in a motion so subtle it would have been missed by a less attentive eye. Juliana, Carlos breathed, his voice barely a whisper. I saw, she replied, her eyes still on her book, maintaining her professional composure, though Carlos could see the hint of a smile at the corner of her lips. This was the moment they had been waiting for. He was choosing to approach. The following days brought more of these small steps. On Thursday, Rex took a treat directly from Juliana's hand. On Friday, he allowed her to briefly touch his back without flinching. And on Saturday, when Carlos arrived for his daily visit, Juliana greeted him with a radiant smile. He slept through the night, she announced. No nightmares, no hiding under the bed. I think it's time to introduce the next phase. Which is? Carlos asked, a mix of hope and apprehension in his voice. Controlled socialization with other dogs. We have a few 4-legged rehabilitation specialists who can help. The true test came during what Juliana called the trust trial. They brought Rex to the center of a large, fenced field. Carlos stood at the opposite end, his task to call the puppy across the open space, to ask him to choose trust over fear. At first, Rex remained frozen. His paws seemed rooted to the grass as his eyes darted anxiously between Juliana and Carlos, uncertainty clouding his expression. Carlos crouched down, his voice calm and encouraging. Come on, Rex. You can do it. I'm right here, buddy. The puppy's heart visibly hammered against his ribs. He lifted a paw, then drew it back, the battle between his past and his possible future playing out in every trembling muscle. Halfway across the field, a loud crack echoed from the nearby road, a car backfiring. Rex instantly dropped to the ground, covering his head with his paws, his small body shaking violently as past trauma flooded his senses. Carlos fought every instinct to run to him, knowing this was a moment Rex had to face himself. Instead, he called out softly across the field, It's okay, Rex. I'm here. Nothing's going to hurt you. Remember, you're not that scared little pup anymore. You're stronger than this. For a long, painful moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, Rex lifted his head. His eyes found Carlos's, and something stronger than fear flickered within them. It propelled him forward, step by trembling step, until he finally collapsed into Carlos's waiting arms, having conquered more than just the distance across a field. Juliana, watching from the edge, blinked back tears. In 15 years of working with canine recovery, these moments never failed to move her to her core. That's it, boy, Carlos murmured, stroking Rex gently as the puppy burrowed into his arms. Look what you did. Rex's body still trembled, but it was different now. It wasn't the tremor of terror Carlos knew so well, but a kind of physical release of accumulated tension. It was as if each step across the field had untied an invisible knot in his spirit. This is a turning point, Juliana explained, approaching slowly. He faced a trauma trigger and chose to move forward instead of retreat. She knelt at a respectful distance, noticing how Rex, though still nestled in Carlos's arms, was no longer hiding his face. He looked right at her, his eyes seeming to say, I did it. Did you see? I think we're ready for the next phase, Juliana said with a smile. Tomorrow, we can introduce Luna. Luna, Carlos asked, still absorbed in the moment with Rex. One of our therapy dogs, a 5-year-old Labrador, incredibly gentle and patient. She has a special gift with traumatized dogs. She was rescued from a research lab herself when she was just 8 months old. Carlos nodded, understanding the importance of the step. Socialization was crucial. Rex needed to learn that not all living things were a threat. The next morning, Carlos arrived to find Juliana setting up a smaller enclosure within the open field. When an assistant brought Luna in, Carlos immediately understood her value. The Labrador moved with an almost zen-like serenity, her soft brown eyes radiating a calm that seemed to infect everyone around her. Her golden coat shone in the morning sun, and a blue bandana was tied loosely around her neck, her work uniform. That night, back at home, Rex didn't hide under the furniture or startle at every sound. Instead, he curled up beside Carlos on the sofa, his head resting confidently on the man's leg, his breathing slow and steady. The rhythm of inner peace, not the exhaustion of constant fear. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time Rex had crossed a bridge he once thought was broken. The days that followed brought remarkable changes. Rex walked with his head higher, his tail no longer tucked in fear. His eyes, once dull with dread, now held a spark of life. Each morning he would wait by the door with his leash in his mouth, eager for the walks he once feared. He was transforming from a creature expecting pain into one anticipating joy. It was a change that brought tears to Carlos's eyes whenever he let himself remember the broken, trembling puppy he'd found under that dumpster just weeks before. Carlos's apartment in Brooklyn Paulista, once the functional space of a single firefighter, was now a home. There were dog beds in several corners, toys scattered across the floor, and a large cushioned bed next to Carlos's own, though Rex rarely used it, preferring to sleep at his human's feet. One Thursday, Marcella, his colleague who had helped with the rescue, stopped by. "No way. Is that really Rex?" she asked, genuinely stunned to see the dog approach her with curiosity instead of fear. "I remember him trying to melt into the wall when we found him." Carlos beamed with pride as Rex sniffed Marcella's outstretched hand before allowing her to scratch behind his ears. "Juliana worked miracles," Carlos said, "but she says the credit goes to him. He had this strength all along. He just needed a safe place to find it." "What about the trauma with uniforms?" Marcella asked, gesturing to her own firefighter's uniform, which didn't seem to bother Rex. "We're still working on it," Carlos explained. "He's much better with mine, but he still gets nervous around strangers in uniform. Juliana says some triggers may never fully disappear, but he's learning to manage them." In the following week, Carlos and Rex started a new ritual, a morning walk to the nearest park before Carlos's shift. It was never a quick walk. Rex would still occasionally freeze at a sudden noise or the approach of a stranger, but he no longer became paralyzed with terror. On a particularly sunny Sunday, Carlos decided to take Rex to Ibirapuera Park. It was a major test, a huge, bustling space filled with people and pets. He equipped Rex with a special yellow bandana Juliana had provided, a code among dog owners that meant, "Give me space, I'm in training." "We'll take it slow, okay?" Carlos murmured to Rex as they got out of the car. "If it's too much, we go home. No pressure." To his astonishment, Rex showed a confidence he had never seen before. He walked beside Carlos with a steady gait, observing the other dogs with more curiosity than fear. When a child comes running near, Rex flinches for a moment, but then he gathers himself, looking up at Carlos as if to say, "I'm okay. I can handle this." "Your dog is beautiful," the child's mother comments, keeping her little one close. "May I ask what the yellow bandana means?" Carlos smiles. "It means he's learning to trust again. He had a rough start in life." Just as their life has settled into a peaceful rhythm, Carlos receives an urgent call from his old fire station. They are short-staffed for a critical search and rescue mission after a child vanished in the dense wilderness of Serra da Cantareira. Time is running out, and they need every experienced hand they can get, including Carlos, despite his retirement from active duty. Carlos looks at Rex, who is lying calmly at his feet, chewing on his favorite toy. He wonders if the dog can handle something that might trigger memories of his traumatic past. Before he can overthink it, Rex gets up and sits before him with an expectant gaze, as if he understands exactly what is happening and is offering to help. It's a moment of connection so profound, Carlos feels it like a physical touch to his heart. "It's a 7-year-old girl," Captain Rodriguez explains over the phone. "Isabella. She was on a trail with her parents in the northern part of the park. They looked away for a minute, and she was gone. We've been searching for 4 hours now." Carlos feels the weight of responsibility. Even after a year away from search operations, he can't refuse. "I'll be there in 40 minutes, he replies, hanging up and turning to Rex. "What do you say, partner? Are you up for this?" As if understanding every word, Rex stands, his ears at full alert. His eyes, once clouded with fear, now gleam with resolve. Still, Carlos hesitates. Rex has made incredible progress, but a search operation would be a massive sensory overload. Helicopters, dozens of people, loud equipment, the chaos of an emergency. "I don't know if this is a good idea," Carlos murmurs to himself. He picks up his phone again and calls Juliana. To his surprise, she answers immediately. After hearing the situation, she offers, "Can you bring Rex here to the center? I can look after him while you're on the operation." "Actually, I was thinking, do you think he could handle coming with me?" A thoughtful silence hangs on the other end of the line. "Normally, I'd say no," Juliana responds slowly. "But Rex isn't a normal case. He's shown extraordinary resilience. What if it causes a relapse?" "It might," she admits, "but it could also be exactly what he needs. Sometimes finding a purpose is the final step to a full recovery." Carlos looks at Rex, who remains seated attentively before him, almost as if awaiting the decision. "I'll bring an emergency kit for him," Juliana adds. "I can meet you at the command post in an hour." 30 minutes later, Carlos parks at the rescue operations base camp, set up at the entrance to the reserve. The place is a hive of activity. Firefighters, police officers, civil defense volunteers, and other K9 rescue teams. As Carlos opens the car door, Rex freezes. The noise, the uniformed people, the distant sirens. It could be the perfect trigger for a meltdown. Carlos braces for a panic reaction, ready to take Rex straight home. But the dog surprises everyone. After a brief hesitation, he steps out of the car, his paws cautious but steady. His eyes are alert, but not wide with fear. He stays glued to Carlos's side, clearly on edge but in control. "Never underestimate a survivor," a familiar voice says from behind them. Juliana has arrived, carrying a small pack with supplies for Rex. "Do you really think he's ready?" Carlos asks, still unsure. "Look at him," she replies. "He's not panicking. He's not hiding. He's processing, Assessing. That's strength, Carlos. That's what he learned from you. Captain Rodriguez divides the teams by sector. Carlos and Rex are assigned the southeast, a steep area with streams and rock formations that make the search particularly challenging. Are you sure your dog is up for this? The captain asks, eyeing Rex with doubt. He hasn't gone through standard search and rescue training. Not all heroes wear a badge, Carlos replies, patting Rex's head. Trust me, Captain. If anyone knows how to find someone who's lost and scared, it's him. Juliana hands Carlos a small canine first aid kit and a reflective vest for Rex. I'm coming with you, she announces. If he starts showing signs of stress, we'll need to intervene immediately. The designated trail is daunting, with dense vegetation and uneven terrain. Carlos lets Rex lead the way, keeping the leash slack. To his amazement, Rex seems to intuitively grasp what they are looking for. He alternates between sniffing the ground and the air, moving with purpose, not fear. It's incredible, Juliana comments in a low voice. It's like he understands the mission. After nearly 2 hours, with the sun sinking and the temperature dropping, Carlos's radio crackles with updates from other teams, all unsuccessful. A knot of worry tightens in his chest. A night in the wilderness would be dangerous for anyone, let alone a 7-year-old girl. Suddenly Rex stops. His entire body goes rigid, an arrow pointing to a specific direction off to the right, down a steep slope that wasn't on their original path. He's found something, Carlos whispers. Juliana watches the dog's behavior intently. That's not fear. It's focus. Trust him. Carlos gives the leash more slack, allowing Rex to guide them. The dog moves forward with confidence, carefully descending the embankment, occasionally looking back to ensure they are following. The fading light becomes an issue, and Carlos switches on his headlamp. That's when they hear it. A low, muffled cry, almost inaudible over the sound of the wind in the leaves. Rex freezes, his ears shooting forward. Then, he lets out a clear, assertive bark. Not the frightened yelp Carlos knew from the early days, but a strong, communicative sound, as if to say, I am here to help. Following Rex's urgent pull, they push through a final line of brush and find a small ravine. Down below, huddled against a rock, is Isabella. Her school uniform is dirty and torn, her face is streaked with dried tears and dust, and her knee is bleeding from a scrape. The transformation in Rex is breathtaking. The dog who once trembled at the sight of strangers now approaches the child with an almost maternal gentleness, delicately licking her face. After a moment of surprise, the little girl wraps her arms around his neck, her sobs turning to sighs of relief. Rex has gone from the rescued to the rescuer. Carlos immediately keys his radio. We've found her. Sector Southeast. Coordinates. He checks his handheld GPS and relays the location. She's conscious and responsive. Minor injuries. Send in the medical team. While they wait, Carlos watches in awe as Rex stays by Isabella's side, letting her bury her face in his fur, offering the kind of comfort that only one who truly knows fear can provide. You're my hero, the little girl whispers to Rex, her small fingers clutching his fur as if he were her only link to safety. After Isabella is safely reunited with her family, the story of Rex's remarkable rescue spreads throughout the community. The once pitied, trembling dog is now seen with admiration and respect, his transformation from victim to hero capturing hearts and minds all over São Paulo. Weeks later, Rex receives an unprecedented honor, a nomination for São Paulo's annual Hero of the Year award, a title usually reserved for human citizens. The ceremony at the Municipal Theater draws crowds from across the region, all gathered to witness the official recognition of a dog who overcame unimaginable cruelty to save a child's life. As Carlos adjusts the small medal hanging from Rex's collar before they go on stage, he whispers with pride, "Remember, this is your moment. You earned this." The words would have been incomprehensible to the terrified puppy hiding under a dumpster just months before. The Municipal Theater is packed on that September night. The mayor of São Paulo, city council members, and various dignitaries have gathered for the annual ceremony honoring extraordinary acts of citizenship and heroism. Carlos, dressed in his firefighter's dress uniform, waits in the wings with Rex. The dog is surprisingly calm, sitting with an almost noble posture, as if he understands the gravity of the occasion. Juliana had spent the last few weeks using specific desensitization techniques to prepare him for the crowd and the applause. "I never imagined we'd come this far," Carlos confesses to Juliana, who stands beside them, adjusting Rex's special collar, an elegant piece of soft leather chosen just for tonight, replacing the therapeutic one he wore for months. "He always had it in him," Juliana replies. "He just needed someone to believe." From the audience comes a murmur of anticipation. Carlos peeks through the curtain and sees Isabella's family in the front row. The 7-year-old girl sitting between her parents, holding a small, wrapped gift. "Looks like Isabella brought him a present," Carlos says, smiling. A stagehand approaches. "5 minutes, sir. You'll be called up next." Rex looks up, as if he understands the countdown perfectly. His tail gives a light thump against the polished stage floor. "Nervous?" Carlos asks the dog, speaking to him as he always does, as an equal, a partner. Rex tilts his head, his eyes locked on Carlos's face with the fierce intensity he developed during his recovery, a look that seems to see beyond words. The evening's host, a well-known local news anchor, begins the introduction. "Our next honor is a truly special one. For the first time in the 72-year history of this award, we recognize a hero who is not human, but who has demonstrated a courage, resilience, and compassion that many of us humans aspire to." The amplified voice makes Rex's ears twitch slightly, but he remains perfectly composed, a dramatic contrast to the dog who would tremble at the slightest noise just months ago. "He's ready," Juliana whispers, giving an approving nod. "Please, a warm welcome for Rex, the German shepherd who, after surviving terrible abuse, helped save the life of little Isabella Pereira in the Serra da Cantareira, and his guardian, retired firefighter Carlos Mendes." The curtains part, revealing a sea of faces. The lights are bright, and the sound of applause fills the theater. For a fleeting instant, Carlos feels Rex falter, a reflex of old fear. But then the dog steps forward, beside Carlos, meeting the crowd with a dignity that brings tears to the eyes of many in attendance. At center stage, the mayor stands holding a small ceremonial medal and a framed certificate. Behind her, a large screen shows photos from the rescue, including a particularly moving shot of Rex comforting Isabella in the ravine, his eyes reflecting a deep understanding of human suffering. "This is your moment," Carlos repeats softly to Rex as they walk across the stage together. "You turned pain into purpose. That's what it means to be a hero." Rex becomes more than just a hero by title. He transforms into a living symbol of resilience and hope throughout São Paulo. With Carlos at his side, he visits schools to teach children about kindness and courage. He sits with veterans battling PTSD and serves as a therapy dog at the Hospital das Clínicas, bringing comfort to patients with a calm, understanding presence that seems to communicate, "I know what suffering is, and you are not alone." Through all these new experiences, Rex carries himself with a quiet dignity. His body, once trembling, is now strong and confident. His eyes, no longer clouded by fear, are clear and bright. The dog who once couldn't turn his head without trembling now walks proudly through hospital corridors, classroom halls, and veteran meetings. His very existence is a testament to the healing power of compassion and the indomitable nature of the spirit when given a chance to recover from even the deepest wounds. On Tuesday mornings, Carlos and Rex can be found in the pediatric wing of the university hospital. The children, many facing painful treatments and long stays, eagerly await these visits. "Is Rex coming today?" asks Mateus, a 9-year-old boy battling leukemia. His mother smiles, adjusting the colorful beanie that covers his hairless head. "Yes, he never misses. You know that." When Rex enters the room wearing his official therapy dog vest, Mateus's face lights up. The dog calmly approaches the bed, resting his head within reach of the boy's weak fingers. "You're the best part of Tuesdays, you know," Mateus whispers, stroking Rex's soft ears. The dog closes his eyes in quiet appreciation, remaining perfectly still despite the tubes and medical equipment nearby. A capacity for calm in chaotic environments, one he developed during his own recovery. On Thursdays, they visit the Psychosocial Care Center for Veterans in Santo Amaro. There, men and women who served in the Brazilian armed forces fight their own invisible demons. Many suffer from flashbacks, nightmares, and a constant state of high alert, symptoms Rex knows intimately. Paulo, a former soldier who served on UN peacekeeping missions in Haiti, rarely speaks during group sessions. But when Rex approaches him, something shifts. The dog sits patiently by Paulo's side, sometimes for hours, demanding nothing more than permission to be present. "He knows," Paulo said once, breaking months of silence. "Somehow he knows what's going on in here." He pointed to his own head. "It's like he can see the nightmares even when I'm awake." On Saturdays, the pair participates in the Reading with Dogs program at the Mario de Andrade Library. Children with learning difficulties or social anxiety read stories aloud to Rex, who listens with unwavering, non-judgmental attention. His presence lowers the children's cortisol levels, explains the program's educational psychologist. Their blood pressure drops, their anxiety falls, and they can focus better. It's especially effective for children with dyslexia or attention deficit disorder. Between all these commitments, Carlos sometimes worries he's asking too much of his partner. One Sunday afternoon, while they rest in Trianon Park, he shares these concerns with Juliana, who continues to monitor Rex's progress. "Do you think we're pushing him too hard?" Carlos asks, watching Rex lie peacefully on the grass, observing the passers-by. Juliana smiles, adjusting her glasses. "On the contrary, Carlos. Rex has found his purpose. Notice how different his demeanor is on therapy days. He wakes up excited, focused. He knows he has a job to do. People to help, like a canine firefighter," Carlos jokes. "Exactly. Some dogs need a job to thrive, and Rex, in particular, needs to know his existence has meaning beyond his own suffering. Every life he touches is a way of making sense of the trauma he endured." Journalist Marcia Dantas requests a special interview for TV Globo's Sunday program. Carlos initially hesitates. Media exposure can be stressful, but Juliana encourages him. His story could inspire so many people, and more importantly, It could change attitudes about traumatized animals. So many are put down because people assume they can't recover. On the day of the interview, the Globo studios are specially prepared to welcome Rex. Softer lights, a reduced crew, a controlled environment to minimize potentially upsetting stimuli. So, Carlos, Marcia begins, when you found Rex on that rainy night, did you ever imagine he would become not just a member of your family, but a national hero? Carlos smiles, stroking the neck of Rex, who sits composedly by his side. That night, I just wanted him to survive until morning. His transformation, well, it's a daily miracle that never ceases to amaze me. And what about the future? Are there plans to expand his therapy work? One evening, as the sunset paints the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Carlos and Rex sit together on their balcony after a long day of therapy visits, looking at the now healthy and confident German shepherd, who rests his head on his lap. Carlos's voice thickens with emotion. When I found you that night under the dumpster, I thought I was saving you. But the truth is, you saved me. I was lost after leaving the fire department, with no purpose or direction, until you showed me that life isn't about what we've lost. It's about what we're still willing to fight for. Rex looks up with his expressive, intelligent eyes, no longer shadowed by fear, but bright with a contentment and understanding that transcends words. In this quiet moment, as the last light fades from the sky, both man and dog acknowledge the profound truth of their journey together. That sometimes, the most broken beings have the greatest capacity to heal, not just themselves, but all those they touch. And that in the end, it's not about erasing the scars of the past, but about transforming them into bridges to a future filled with purpose, connection, and unconditional love. Their apartment in Brooklyn is no longer the same. Where once there was only the basic furniture of a single man, there are now framed photos. Carlos and Rex on the day of the award ceremony. Rex with Isabella and her family. The assisted therapy team from the hospital, with Rex at the center. On the living room wall, hanging prominently, is his certified therapy dog certificate next to the medal from the city. On the bookshelf, a growing collection of letters from children, veterans, and patients whose lives were touched by Rex's calm, reassuring presence. Carlos strokes Rex's ears as he watches the stars begin to appear in the São Paulo sky. The dog sighs contentedly, completely relaxed, a state that seemed impossible when he trembled uncontrollably in the first days after his rescue. You know what Juliana told me today? Carlos remarks, still gazing at the sky. They're going to use your story as a case study in the veterinary course at USP, a whole session on trauma recovery in animals. Rex's ears twitch, as they always do when he hears Juliana's name. She said you rewrote what they thought was possible in terms of recovery. Carlos smiles, remembering the initial skepticism of the veterinarians. Apparently, you're a walking, four-legged miracle. From across the way, the sounds of another rescue can be heard. Carlos brought home a lame cat found near the fire station 3 weeks ago. The feline, now named Fumasa, or Smoke, initially hid under the furniture, terrified of everything and everyone. Surprisingly, it was Rex who made the first connection, lying patiently at a distance until the cat mustered the courage to approach. Who would have thought you'd become a mentor for other traumatized animals, huh? Carlos chuckles softly. From rescue to rescuer to therapist. That's quite the resume. The phone rings inside the apartment. Carlos knows it's probably Isabella. She calls every Thursday to tell Rex about her week at school. It's a tradition that began spontaneously after the rescue and is now sacred to everyone involved. 1 minute, Carlos says, getting up to answer. But before he goes inside, he turns to look at Rex one last time, bathed in the golden light of dusk. It's hard to believe this is the same animal he found on that rainy night. The contrast is surreal. From the skeletal, terrified puppy who could barely meet anyone's gaze, to the confident, serene dog who now brings comfort to the most vulnerable. Carlos thinks of the lives intertwined with theirs on this journey. Juliana, the behaviorist who never gave up, even on the hardest days. Isabella and her family, forever connected by the bond forged in that ravine. The patients in the hospital who eagerly await their Tuesdays. The veterans who find in Rex's silent presence a comfort that words could never offer. As he answers the phone and hears Isabella's excited voice on the other end, Carlos watches Rex calmly walk inside and sit beside him, as he always does during these weekly calls. The dog cocks his head, recognizing the girl's voice even through the phone. "Yes, Isabella, he's right here beside me." Carlos smiles, putting the phone on speaker. "I bet he was waiting for your call." As the girl's voice fills the room with stories about her school week, Carlos realizes a simple but profound truth. Some heroes don't wear capes. Some have 4 paws, a painful past, and an extraordinary ability to transform their own suffering into an endless source of healing for others. And in that perfect moment, with the night settling over São Paulo and Isabella's bright voice filling the apartment, both man and dog know, without a word needing to be said, that they have arrived exactly where they are supposed to be. Not in spite of their scars, but because of them.